hope you're excited for a very interesting module this evening. We went through it with him overall, and it looks very awesome. So I'm excited for you. We have tonight a very special guest and module instructor. His name is Corey Lee. Corey is currently, I'm sure he'll introduce himself, but he's currently a design advocate at Figma, working on many different things, having been a chief design officer, lead designer, and many other design roles I'm sure he'll get into. I think you guys are really in for a treat tonight. So thank you very much. And I think I'll hand it over to you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Thanks for the intro. So once again, my name is Corey. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the all about product design. So I'll give myself just a quick follow-up intro there. I currently work at Figma as a designer advocate. So as a designer advocate, I do many different things, but one of the things I do is I really help support many of the teams who are creating digital products today to use Figma and use design as effective as it can be, right? And that means a lot of it is, teaching them about design systems and design best practices and things like that. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of share some of that knowledge with you today. And just as my background, my background is in product design as a product designer. So I've, been working in Japan for 15 years in startups and large tech companies across many different product verticals. And then through that experience, I've learned many things of product design, and that's kind of led me to my position here today. So with that said, I think we'll kick things off today, and with talking about the agenda we have here. So this is our agenda we have for today. We're going to start with the definition of product design, and then from there we're going to go into the process of product design, which entails basically product definition, going into the design process and the tooling, researching, ideating, then taking your design, refining that, and then finally kind of prototyping and testing your design. So obviously for time constraints and things like that, we won't be able to kind of like go end to end and like create a full product design maybe today, but hopefully you'll have a lot of hands-on time to kind of get a taste of that and what that feels like, what that looks like. So you can kind of like maybe take that home with you and refine that and kind of bring it to the next level in the future. But it's going to be hopefully fun. It's going to be informational and hands-on. So let's get started. Also, if you have any questions, so in this file, everyone should be joining this file here. It's in the chat. There is a Q&A here on the side. So if you have questions while I'm talking, what you can do is you can use the sticky, which is you can just hit S, or you can from the toolbar you can just grab a sticky. Let me move this out of the way. Grab a sticky, put it on the canvas, and then write your question here. And then when we go back to the end of the module, I can kind of loop back here and we can talk about the different questions. So feel free to kind of add any questions you have today here, and we'll kind of like check them regularly and see if anything needs to be addressed there. So today we are using Figjam, just to kind of give you a heads up. So Figjam is a whiteboarding software made by Figma. And we're going to do most of the presentation here, but we're going to jump over to Figma, which is a tool for creating product design. And they both have like slightly different use cases. So from the start, we're going to use Figjam here, and I'll kind of explain how to use it as we kind of go through process here, but like feel free to just like play with the tools and the canvas and stuff like that and kind of get used to it. It can't hurt. Don't worry about it like making a mess or anything like that. Let's jump into it. So the first part I'm going to talk about is the definition of product design. So what is product design? So I have a definition here that I can kind of go into. So product design is the process of developing experiences to meet user needs in line with business goals and strategies. What this means is that a business is creating something, and their intent is maybe to sell a specific service. They have a business model, and as a product designer, you are developing the experience that's going to lead them to those goals. Whether it's like their experience is a hotel booking app. Or that their business is a hotel, right? And your maybe job as a product designer would be creating the experience of a hotel booking, right? Or you have an e-commerce business, and then your goal as a product designer would be creating the experience of buying from that e-commerce business and things like that. In this case, when we talk about product design actually has a pretty broad scope compared to, say, UX design. When we talk about UX design, it's more about the experience in like the digital space of like, say, hey, here's an app that's already defined. How do we improve that experience, improve that conversion rate, and things like that. Product design encompasses that and even more, right? So when we're thinking about product design versus UX design, it's not just the UX and the UI and like what we see on the screen and that experience. It goes, farther beyond that, starting at like the strategy and the direction, like what should we make? Why should we make this? Who are we making this for? That is all also part of product design. A lot of these things have overlap when it comes to like a product manager, but from the product design side, designers also spend a lot of time doing research and doing strategy on this side before going into the pixels and making those beautiful screens that everyone likes to use, right? So that's the difference there. Product design is more encompassing of like strategy and the actual design that you use and experience, while UX design is just with that narrow segment. And also in some cases, product design will go into touching upon like the go to market. Like after you've built the thing, how are we going to deliver this to the users when it comes to like marketing and stuff like that? It's a bit more advanced, but like this is the high level of the product design process here. So the first step really is goal setting. It's like, what are you going to make, right? And why do we need this? Why do we make it this way? What's the approach, right? And then the second step here is research. So when we decided like what we need to make, and that usually comes from the business requirements, we need to think about like what's the best way to make this. And that comes from research of looking at, say, competitors and similar, apps and services in your same space. We look at, reports and data and things like that. Everything to kind of inform your design process and make sure that like you're making, decisions on the experience side that are based off of some kind of data, some kind of, research, and not just kind of like a gut feeling of like, hey, this looks cool, or, this might work. We want to kind of have a little bit more kind of information to make these decisions, right? Sometimes you're working in a space where it's a varied use space and you don't have that. That can be challenging. But usually if you're working in a space that's already defined, there's already like pre-existing things that you can look at and research to understand what the patterns are and what the trade-offs and things like that are. And the third step here is analysis, right? So we take that research and we think about like what kind of opportunities there are in the market. So let's say like you're making an e-commerce app, and all the e-commerce apps have really just very sterile, super clean design. Maybe you think like maybe there's a opportunity in the market for like a really kind of like colorful, fun, and like Gen Z oriented design. That could be an analysis you have, and based on that analysis, that could change the direction of your design, your product design that you create, right? So that's all how kind of these like your product research and strategy rolls into like the actual design that ends up being created. And then from that analysis, once you've kind of chosen that direction and that approach, this goes into actually kind of just boiling that down into like the specific details of like what we need to make when it comes to like the point by point of the experience and how data will kind of work across those screens and things like that, along with like some of the planning, which we'll go into later. And then again, on the last step would be more kind of execution post launch. So on this side, when it comes to design, we don't want to just make design and just throw it out there. We want to make design and kind of expect a result. So some of the planning around product design is around like whatever our key metrics that we're looking at for success, right? What are those OKRs? So if I have a design, or maybe I'm redesigning an app, maybe my OKR is to increase the conversion rate of this specific screen over this flow. That is something we think about. So when it comes to like, say, product design, a lot of it, starts at a very high level, a lot of, research and writing and things like that. It can be very, very abstract. And, when it comes, a lot of product design maybe starts from something like this, like just a wireframe, very, very simple. You'd be surprised at, how much conversation, how much research goes around to create something like this. And then this final step here, is what we kind of call like high fidelity design. Once you've kind of like, built out our end-to-end flows and, thought about, how this thing's going to work, then we kind of bring it to the final level of polishing that and thinking about like, oh, what are the colors we're going to have here? What are the images? And what are the kind of the fine details that are going to make it really nice looking, right? This is more of the final step, and not always the level you spend time working at. A lot of times product designs, people spend a lot of time working at this level. And this could even be sometimes hand-drawn, which we'll see as well. So product design is really kind of like, we want to deliver this end-to-end user experience, but to deliver that, there's a lot of before and after in that research that happens. And it's not really always just spending time on, making those beautiful pixels on the screen. So that's the high level kind of like definition of what product design is. And I want to actually kind of just like today jump into that process from start to finish, so you can see how product designers work and what their kind of like day to day is. So the best way to do that is to start at the first step, which is problem definition. So when you're a product designer, one of the first things you need to do is either you need to define what you're going to build and why you need to build it, or you receive that from someone else who's defining it. And depends on the company. Some companies will have, PMs or directors who may define that at a high level. But even with that, as a, designer, you still need to kind of understand who you're designing for, and that can influence your design. So one of the things that we have most often is actually a like user journey. And this is for doing like discovery. So if someone says, create me an e-commerce app where people can buy something, even though that's very basic and simple, and you've seen that 1,000 times, you still need to think about who are your users, and based on that, you might tweak some things and change things to make the most optimal experience. So from here, we might have a user journey that looks like something like this, where we have different steps along the journey of, let's say, purchasing something from an e-commerce app, right? We'll kind of list up the actions of what that entails. Maybe that entails logging in, then searching for the product that you're going to purchase. And that first step there, maybe there's a consideration of like, maybe the person is browsing through a list of predefined products, or maybe someone's using like a search bar or something, right? And then from there, they go maybe go to a detail page, and then they look at the specs, and then from there decide if we want to buy it or not, and put it in their cart and purchase. So those would all be kind of defined here as actions. So we'd say step one is maybe search via search bar, or the list view. And then step two is look at the details. Step three is add to cart. Step four is checkout, and then step five is put in your payment information and complete the order, right? And we put those as actions. And then within that, we think about the different elements of the interface as touch points, and put those as steps here. And then for here, under the thoughts, we think about like the kind of the different kind of concerns, the pain points, and also like the potential opportunities here. So maybe during this checkout process, there's an opportunity to make it faster. For maybe the first time someone has to put in information, but like the second time, there's an opportunity to make it faster by having a buy it now button, where people just click once and they don't have to add to cart. They can just go straight to checkout. Those are all these kind of things that you would think about like during these kind of thoughts and considerations of pain points here. For feelings here, some people do it, some people don't. This is just a very kind of like high level of how people are feeling. Are people frustrated at this step, or people are more likely to kind of churn at this step here? And if they are likely to churn at this step, are there things that we can do to prevent that and kind of bring them back to that happy space, right? And a lot of things we'll talk about as well would be like, when it comes to user experience, you want to think about it as cycles. One good example would be like social, right? For social, the optimal user experience is having someone, log in regularly and post regularly, right? We have to kind of think about like, how do we manage that? How do we keep people motivated over time to keep doing the same thing over and over. And you'll kind of think about this maybe in kind of feelings of like, can we give them a reward for doing certain things to kind of bring them back up when they're going to churn, and then does that reward, you know, align with like the desired behaviors for the app? A good example would be like, X or Twitter, whatever you call it. For X or Twitter, I think that the base metric was that like if you follow a certain amount of people within, say, the first day or a few hours of using the app, you have a higher likelihood of successfully using that that app as a long-term user, right? So one of the things they did to reduce that churn was they thought about like, how do we make sure that someone has a feed that has lots of interesting tweets and stuff like that from the very beginning, to prevent them from churning. So then they created like basically a flow where people on board and then they choose maybe accounts that are very, very popular that will give them like a starter feed of interest for them and things like that. So those are all kind of thinking about like the user journey over the kind of like the experience of your application and how that kind of ties into the business. It gets more complex there, but like just to kind of give you like a high level kind of thought process of how we think about user journey. This is a good example here. And here's a template here from in Figjam. So if you click that, it'll open in a separate window and you can create your own user journeys here. For today, I think we won't go into like build one of these today. What I want to talk about today is actually something that's really important, which is the PRD. So has anyone here like heard of the PRD before? I don't know. So PRD is basically a product requirements document, just short for that. So what this is basically it defines what you're going to make and why you're making it, right? So this document, it could be defined by the product manager, the PM, or sometimes it's also defined by a designer or an engineer. In most cases, you might have, say, 3 documents of like the product manager creating a document like this, and then the designer creating one from the design perspective, and then an engineer creating one from the technical perspective. But let's just kind of jump into what this is here, and just looking at it point by point. So in this case, we're defining that we're going to build a travel app. And we've decided to build this travel app, but we need to kind of, again, define what is this app trying to solve, right? So this starts with like a problem statement here at the high level. The reason why we need to do this is also we need to kind of align for all the stakeholders in the product process, right? That's the product manager, that's the designer, that's the engineers, but that's also other people like, leadership team, like the CEO, the market, the CMO, and stuff like that. So everyone needs to align to make sure that like this is what we agreed to build, right? So we do this with the problem statement. Say, hey, this is an area of opportunity, right? And this is how it could be better, and we're going to build this to solve that issue, right? So in this case, the problem statement is that current travel planning solutions often require users to juggle multiple apps and websites, and this is kind of referring to if you want to travel and go somewhere, you need to book a flight, you need to book a hotel, and then you need to book your activities all separately, right? So that's the problem space that they're trying to solve, and they're finding this here, saying fragmented travel information across different platforms, time consuming, difficult to coordinate, it's not real time, and they want also as a bonus authentic local experiences, right? So in this case, this is a travel app that allows you to kind of basically do it all in one of booking your flight, your hotel, and your activities. So from here, we'll have like a high level approach. If there are any specific things of like, maybe there are competitors in the market that are all separate and fragmented, our approach will be to like maybe make the booking process for all 3 of those things. So the hotel, the flight, and the activities, a seamless experience, like an all-in-one experience maybe. So that will be like a high-level approach here. And then from here, we kind of think about like maybe the goals and success of like, what does success look like for this? Sometimes it is an outcome. Sometimes it is like a quantifiable metric. Maybe this is like, let's get 10,000 users in the first 6 months. Or maybe it's maybe to get people to change the way they think about traveling and embrace this, all-in-one approach. I think different things like that. So it'll be a mix of like qualitative and quantitative metrics. And at the end of this, we'll kind of talk more about that. Within this, sometimes, not always, but you'll have like these user personas. Again, sometimes on the design side, you'll maybe use it as a separate document, but this is just to kind of strengthen your PRD here. So basically you're saying that here's the kind of problem area, and here's just the profile of like the people who would possibly use it. This person, is super time constrained. They're executive, right? They travel a lot, but they don't have time to spend all this time, coordinating all these things separately. All right. And this person has a family and, maybe they're, they need to coordinate. One person needs to coordinate for multiple people together, and that's very hard to do. And then this person is maybe here, someone who's looking for that authentic travel experience that we mentioned of like, he wants to find like discover something that's new and different that he hasn't seen on other apps and things like that. So this is kind of defining the persona who's going to use the app. And then here's the real kind of meat of the document here, which is the key features. And especially as like a product designer, this is really what you kind of like need to focus on here. So in this document, once you kind of define like what you're making and why you're making it, then you'll have key features of like for the application here. So we have, at 0, it's email and Google login. Then we have, itinerary planning, booking, travel assistant, social features, local discovery, all these different features here with the kind of a bullet point list of like what needs to be built. And this is, again, it's very high level here. So it doesn't go screen by screen. As a product designer, you're here to figure out that what does a drag and drop itinerary builder look like? And what's the data that needs to go in there? As the product manager creating this PRD, sometimes you'll get that level of detail in here, and sometimes you won't. It just depends on the team there. But generally, you'll have a high level here of the key features. And then below that, we have some key flows here, just breaking it down even more simply of book a hotel, book a flight, book an activity. And we'll actually like try to wireframe these out today. And then from there, just other information that's very technical, which is like, this is the platform it's for. So if you're a designer, like, okay, we're designing, it's a mobile app. And maybe we'll just pick like iOS and Android from the first start, right? But it's it's going to be a mobile app, and it also has it's a responsive progressive web app for desktop access as well. And then from here, this is just like lots of random information about like the APIs and things like that would be used. If you're a designer, it might be helpful to kind of look at like an API and see what data is available to use in your design. If you say like, oh, booking.com has this API and they can return this information on hotels, you might want to think about that as like a basis for what data you'll display when you're, say, showing the hotel booking page and the hotel detail page, etc., and things like that. So even though these things could be technical, as a designer, sometimes it is good to kind of look into those and to understand like what data you're working with, which is a big thing of product design, of like understanding what data you're using and then how to actually kind of, express that in design. And these are just all kind of like, details here. But the final important thing here is probably like analytics and metrics. So we talked about like just accountability, right? So this is what you're going to make. This is why you're going to make it. But how are we going to like make sure that we are making something that is effective, and how do we measure that, right? So you'll kind of write these things out here: active users, retention rate, things like that, conversion, sales, etc. And then we'll kind of define these under there. And then finally, we'll have like a release timeline and things like that. Like, well, maybe the first release, we're not gonna, create all these features. The first release, we're just gonna create like 1 and 2, right? And that will be defined. And then here, this is again kind of wrapping up with those success metrics as just clear numbers. 100,000 monthly active users within 6 months, high rating, high rate user retention and conversion and things like that. And that's basically it. This is what like, a PRD would look like as a product designer. always have to be the one to, know how to write this, but you should at least understand how to kind of like read this, and then how to transfer that into design. So a big part of product design is understanding going from this to going from this, right? Which is, it's a big jump, but again, that's a product designer. That is the role there of creating that that meets the requirements. All right, so I have kind of gone over the first two sections here. I think we might take like, I don't know, how's everyone feeling? Do you need like a 5 minute break before we jump into the next section here, or are we okay?
Thumbs up if you're okay to continue. Okay, seems like people are okay to continue. We can take a break maybe after the third one.
Yeah,
Or
okay. All right, so this next section, I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then we're going to jump into actually something more hands-on here, which will be creating some wireframes, doing some research in Figma and Figjam. So, like I mentioned here, we're going to talk about the process of creating, say, wireframes and hi-fi design here. Generally, for design, I think about it as kind of like these three phases here of like, there's the free-form design, which is just kind of sketching ideas and not worrying about like, how clean it is, and if it's something that could be, coded and things like that. It could be very just rough and exploratory, right? In this case, you can use Figjam, and you could just be doing sketches. And the second phase is really the structured design. So this is where you start thinking about like, okay, this design has to be something that's actually, codable, and it has to be something that can be deployed. So you have to think about like, is everything on the screen, accounting for all the interactions and the data in a correct way? Are all these components, structured and aligned and spaced in a way that like, this could be coded and realistically and things like that. And the last part is just like handing off just to an engineer. So if you're, someone who doesn't know how to code, then you usually hand it off to an engineer. So you would have like notes and specs and stuff like that onto your design. So just looking at this here, just giving a review here. So like the wireframe phase could be something like this. It could be, just, very simple high level blocks of like where the information is. In this case, this is more like a landing page than an app. But if we have, I think I have an example of an app somewhere in here. Oh, there we go. So this is an example of like an app. If you're creating an app, maybe it just looks like something like this. Super simple. It's not clean at all, but this is like, hey, here's an image, here's a bookmark, here's some text. It's very scribbly, right? It's just to kind of express the idea at a high level before going into this, right? And then for code, we will take it to say the hi-fi level here. And in this case, we'll have things like notes, and all our things will be created as components and with auto layout and things like that in Figma, that are very nicely organized into different flows that are very clear for the engineer to be able to look at this and understand what you're doing and how they should implement that. And that will be like the final step of product design. So yeah, usually it's like that discovery phase of like, those sketches, designing here in like Figma and Figjam, and then prototyping here, which you can do in Figma, and then that handoff phase of this, basically giving all the notes and polishing your design for the engineer to implement. So what we can do here is, let's have everyone open this file here. So this is the sample file that I just showed. You should be able to access that. And let me see. So I'm changing the permissions here. Everyone should be able to actually edit this now. So this is the file that has a lot of samples here, but we'll also use this to kind of like build out some sample design and research. So the first thing we want to do is actually, I want to talk about like how do you get to that wireframe phase and how do you get to that design phase, right? Even this phase here where I have wireframes, that's not the first phase here. When we actually start creating design, like I mentioned before, it actually starts with research, right? So the way we research is actually, we will look at like other apps in the market and other things that have similar patterns, and we'll start to kind of like, put together a little bit of a collection of references, right? So what I like to do is actually, use different sites that have like screenshots of different apps and stuff like that with great patterns. And it's helpful to kind of find that. So if you're going to go back here to FigJam, sorry, we're jumping around a bit. So there's a site here called Collect UI. And if you can open that, I'll share my screen as well to switch here. So if you open that, then you have like a site like this here. On this site here, what's really great about this is that it has things like by the actual kind of like UX experience here. So if it's like we're creating a, say, e-commerce app, you probably need a checkout screen, right? So I click this checkout here, and then I would go in here and look at all these different like checkout screens here, and maybe find one that like looks like something like that might be useful for me. In this case, I'm like, oh, this is a mobile app, and maybe this checkout screen here would be useful. And just go in here and maybe copy and paste that. In this case, that one's an animation, so it's not really good. This is just a flat screen here. So I'll just copy that image here, and then take that image and then bring it back to Figma. So let's go back to Figma here. And if you click on the left-hand side here, there's a page called UX Patterns. And just paste in some of these references here, right? Like that. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll find different things for reference, right? And I'll be like, oh, I like these screens, so let me like, just collect that as reference. And I'll start kind of putting together like a little collection here of like different patterns here. And you see like maybe on like the desktop version is going to have this like split screen here, or maybe like the, app version, it's just a single page where it pops up and things like that. So a lot of the first steps of like creating design is, creating this kind of like reference page here. We'll kind of go in there, look at a benchmark different apps and stuff like that. So maybe you can try that now. If you go to the Collect UI, click on, a few of these different sections and just do like right click, command copy image, or right click and then copy image. And then when you get to Figma, if you right click and then paste here, or just command V as well, you should be able to paste on the canvas into this space here. Let's just see if everyone try that and see if they can do it. Yep. And I'll just like, so I like to like start arranging them, and sometimes I'm thinking about like different patterns, like, oh, maybe there's an analytics screen here, and these are checkouts and things like that, and put them together. And if you kind of like if you just like click and drag like that, you can select multiple things. And a good shortcut to remember is just, if you can hit like Command S, that will create a section. The opposite is at the bottom here of the screen. You should see this like icon here. It looks like kind of like a, I don't know, tic-tac-toe, like, thing right here. If you click on this like arrow here, you can see there is an option for a section, which is also, Shift S. And you can drag a section around different things to kind of create these different things. So I'll say like, maybe this is checkout, and maybe this is analytics. And the first phase will probably be like, again, creating this this reference board right here of these different apps, and let's say like we're doing a travel app. Actually, so let's maybe go back to that PRD. We're building a travel app, right? So maybe we'll think about like what's a common travel app, right? What's something to screenshot? Maybe I go to like Airbnb, right? Obviously. And then I could screenshot that. So in this case, if I had a desktop one, I can just go in here and go like, oh, here's my screenshots of a screen from Airbnb as reference for that travel app. Sure what that one came through. Then I will go in and just like look for different like good references around like maybe common apps, right? If you're building something that's like, a rideshare app, then obviously you're going to look at like Grab, or you're going to look at like Uber and things like that, right? So like really kind of like the first phase is kind of just, building this kind of library of different like screen caps of different patterns, and taking note of like how they are built right here. So you're thinking of this booking app and you're saying, oh, they have like a gallery of images here, right? And then they're going to have like the little, reserve, box here that has information like check in, check out, guest, and things like that, right? So this is all kind of like giving you a little bit of insight of like what maybe are like the existing experiences in the market of what you're going to build. And then you can kind of use that research in your next phase of when you're kind of building a wireframe here. So now we are we've got some of the UX reference. The second one would be like visual inspiration. So this is more like, if you click on this tab here, this is just more like vibes. So at the first level for UX pattern, we're just looking at like how we kind of like structure the information, like the information architecture, and like what the components look like. At the second level, we're thinking about like what are the kind of vibes we're going for. So we're thinking like what is that kind of like the colors and the imagery and the type and things like that. And then we'll start putting different like screen caps and things like that here. So in this case, like I like to use like Pinterest or Unsplash or any other site, or Dribble is a good one as well. So if you are, that's one thing I will say, like if you're really getting into design, like when it comes to like product design, I would say use Dribble for like the inspiration of like vibes, but not really like UX, right? So like here I am at Dribble, I'm looking at these things and they're not always like super realistic, or like they don't have all the necessary information you might need. But as far as like kind of a visual aspect, you're like, oh, this thing looks really cool, looks very polished and stuff like that. So maybe I'll just capture that as like thinking about the colors and the vibes and stuff like that. And then I'll put that again on my kind of like visual inspiration mood board here, right? So that's the biggest difference here, is that like we're looking for two different things. At the first one, so at the UX patterns, we're just looking about how we can create interactions and like organize information. You're not really worried about like the kind of like the visual aspects of the design itself. And the second part is again just like the visual inspiration of like how the colors and how the design and all that's going to look. It's going to determine the kind of overall kind of feel and the mood of like what you're creating. This is not really that important for like the first phase of like wireframing, but it's often done too as well, like at that phase. So, and this is very just a similar pattern here. So you can see that if we jump over to like the design page here, you can see the final design here. And it's this is the very polished design. This is what is basically been shipped. But if you go back to the visual inspiration, you can see the colors and stuff like that were already there. There's some colors here. There's the text and things like that, and then the imagery as well. So this imagery might be pulled from like stock photo like sites, or things like Unsplash, or you could even use like Midjourney and stuff like that to generate things from prompts. To just get that feel for that and paste that onto the board. In this case, you can see that these are actually like components and things like that. So this means that the designer is probably just like doing a little bit of design exploration, just to kind of get a feel for things and like how they want to make that, the overall kind of vibe look before going into like building out the whole thing. So this is, that kind of exploration there based on all these other things here. You can see that there are some explorations here that may or may not represent really the final UX. So now let's go over to wireframes. And I think this is where we can really get started on building that prompt for the PRD. So if you are in Figma and you click on that wireframes page on the left-hand tab, it should be on this page here. So we have some sections here. There's 6 sections because we think we have 6 teams, and you can build your wireframes in here, or we have Figjam as well under the pages. If you're not familiar with Figjam, you can click on the top left page, workspace, and we have these here. I'll explain it quickly. So first we'll start with Figjam. So if you're not familiar with Figjam, there's some basic tools on the bottom here that we can use to wireframe. The first one, the easiest one, I think, would be like using the marker. So if you click on this marker here, it gives you like a pencil tool that you can use, and you can just draw things. You can draw screens, right? This is a very easy way. If you don't want to worry about like messing with the tool, you can just do it visually. So for creating a mobile app, I might start thinking about like, here is an app and here is an image, right? In most cases, when it comes to wireframes, usually people draw images like this with an X. I don't know why, but this is what we represent images as, because it's very easy to create. It's like, okay, here's a square and you put an X in it, and that's just like, this is an image, right? And then we usually represent like text with either lines or like this, or maybe like just a zigzag for even shorter too. Like that's it, right? And that's, if you squint and look from far away, maybe it looks like text, right? So you kind of start getting the gist of it, and you see, okay, here's a page that has an image and it has some text here, and then maybe at the right it has like, let's say like at the bottom right it has this like circle button, and it's like I don't know, maybe it's a plus button or something like that, right? And we can start just drawing these rough wireframes right here, right? You can do other things like paste images, copy paste them into Figjam, or you can use the shapes and stuff like that to create basic things, whatever helps with you. So I would say, like, if you want to try Figjam, you could explore it that way. Or we can do wireframes in Figma. So the way we do that is you can do it similar to as well with hand-drawn if you want. If we're in Figma and you look down here at the bottom, there's a pencil tool. If you click on the pencil tool, that's essentially the same as the marker tool in Figjam, and we can do the same thing here and draw out, that wireframe, right? The same way. Or we can do this with like just simple shapes, right? So one helpful thing about Figma, if you're in here, is you can create a frame with the F key. And then if you click on the F key here, within Figma, you should see on the right-hand side a bunch of different templates here, right? By default, it looks like it's on presentation, but if I click under like phone, I can see like iPhone 16. I click on that and it's going to paste in an iPhone 16 size frame for me, like the perfect size, right? Let me just change this color a bit to make it easier to see here. And now I have a frame that's like the perfect size for the app I'm going to create, right? So you don't have to worry about like figuring out what the size of that screen is. You can just have that there from the template. So what I'll do here is I'll probably think about like what my screens I need with that, and start duplicating things. Like maybe I need like, let's say like there's in this flow, there's maybe like 4 screens, and kind of align them that way. Sometimes, in most cases, I like to align a flow from screen to screen. Let's say like you log in and then you get to the user page. Do those horizontally going from left to right, just makes it easy to read. And then if I have the same screen but different states, then I like to do those vertically. In this case, it might be like, you have your home screen, but you haven't added your icon. You have your home screen after you added your icon. Maybe something like that would be vertical. So basically, in this case, think about this: that let's say state. I can type here. Sorry. States vertical flows horizontal, right? So if you're reading that way, so this is how you probably kind of think about how you build out your design here. So if I kind of skip over back to this example I have here, I'll show you this kind of mock-up design here. But in this case, this one is maybe not the best example, I'd say, in this case, because it's not lined up that way. But if we kind of ignore the things here below, basically here my flow is I have a top level screen. Someone clicks this, article, and there's a detail page, and it's going from right to left. And then we have another category, and then the detail page. And those are going from left to right. Sorry. But yeah, think about like how you organize your screens in a way that basically it's understandable how this flows, right? In this case, actually, here's a good one here. Sorry. This is probably the best example, I think, here of like the left to right. So it starts here with the first screen, and the flow is on the left. And as you're proceeding through the flow, this is basically building a recipe, right? It ends with this last page on the right here. And then you can see here for this one screen here, it looks like there is an alternate version of the screen. So we just think of that as a different state, maybe in this flow. Maybe they had this list view versus the kind of like just image icon view right here, right? As an option that way. But basically it's reading from left to right from the flow, and we just kind of group it that way. So what we'll do here is, now that you're in Teams, we go back to, sorry to jump around too much here, go back to the PRD up in Figjam. We have the sample PRD here. For each team, maybe let's give you like, I don't know, can we give you like 10 minutes or so, or let's say 15 minutes max. I'll kind of go around and help everyone else as you're building it, to kind of build a wireframe based on this PRD. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in here. What I want you to do is basically, from these key flows, with your team, choose one of these flows to create, right? Choose one of these flows to create, and then create a end-to-end flow. So if it's booking the hotel, what are the steps to book a hotel that are user required? You might think about whatever common apps there are as a baseline for those steps, and then within that flow, what are the data that's in each screen, right? And maybe just kind of draw a sketch out there. So what I'll do is I'll set a timer here for, let's say 15 minutes here, and then right now you can get with your team, just discuss. Choose your flow, and then choose whether you're going to create it in Figma or Figjam, and then start building that flow. I think we'll do breakout rooms right now, and within each breakout room, I'll check on you, and I'll kind of give you a bit of tips on how to actually use, like say, Figjam or Figma, if you're having trouble with that. But yeah, let's start that. How's that sound?
Sounds good. By the way, today we're gonna merge the two teams, so there's gonna be three teams. And FinTech 1 with FinTech 2, Streaming 1 with Streaming 2, and so on. So yeah, if we can open the breakout rooms, please. I think you guys can join by yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, let me just review your progress. I'm not going to grade you on this, I just want to see how you did. So I'm going to jump over here in Figma. I'm sharing my screen now. And then we'll go look at what your progress is, and we'll talk about like bringing that to like high fidelity design. So this is the FinTech team. Looks like you got like, some basic list of the requirements here. And then from there, you've got a nice flow going on here, left to right. Very simple blocks of images and input fields and buttons and stuff like that, even though starting from a longer end screen, which is nice as well. Yeah, I think this level of like, just like wireframe fidelity, this lo-fi kind of feel. It's not hand drawn, but you just use basic rectangles and stuff like that. It's just like enough to express exactly what you need, right? And this is what it's all about at this level, is not worrying about the details and stuff like that, but just kind of having some kind of like, hierarchy to your information architecture of like, hey, search is at the top, you know, this button is at the bottom, then we have a tab bar. I can see like what you're going for. And then once you have kind of like figure that out, then it's much easier to kind of go to the next step. So this looks really good. Yeah, good job on making that, and then adding some reference there too as well. And then kind of ending it, yeah, from start to finish at the payment confirmed as well. Looks good. Go down next to smart speaker team as well. This is interesting too. This is like on this side, you've used just like screenshots of different references just to kind of like represent that, right? So I think at the very like beginning, this is a valid approach here. But then once you've kind of figured out, okay, this is the high level flow, you probably have to go into actually sketching them, because you'll have different data requirements compared to like maybe your reference material here. Maybe they want to have these different categories at the top, or maybe they want to have different information on here. So just be aware of that. But definitely the goal of this was really just kind of think about like that start to finish. And I think you have that as well, which is good. Thank you for your booking. And you kind of understand again, what happens at next, asking for a review and things like that. And the last one we have here is streaming team. Streaming team also very good. Lots of reference here, which is really good. Always good to see here. So pulling out different things, booking.com, Airbnb, and stuff like that. And these are all hand drawn. This is also easy to understand here. So you have like just high level, text of what your flow is going to be, the named frames here. And then I can see here, this is some kind of like, okay, like list view that's searchable. And then here is kind of like a search with filters and stuff like that, filter down the price, and even this is like, it's super simple, but I get it. If you've ever used like any kind of like travel app, you see like these pricing bars and stuff like that, and you can like slide it and like adjust that to match your price range. And that's really all you need at this level. So a really good job on like expressing it at like, very well with like just low level just sketches and stuff like that. So good to see. Yeah, so with that said, what I want to do is actually have you take one of these screens here and kind of bring it to like higher level fidelity, make it looks like something like this, or actually going back into like our example here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's think about like how to get there. So the way we do this usually is, again, you'll have that visual inspiration and stuff to work from. But you're going to think about adding colors. You're going to think about, maybe, tweaking the fonts, thinking about your spacing, aligning things very carefully, and bringing that to a high level, right? So the way I would do that if I was going over here to your wireframes, let me just pick one up here. So maybe if I was looking at this page here, some of the things you want to think about is like inconsistent, spacing between items and alignment and stuff like that. So maybe in this case, like everything would have like a maximum width here. So I would start kind of showing that out of like drawing a rectangle. For iPhone, the hard thing is like the numbers game, right? So the layout is 393, points wide, pixels wide, whatever you want to call it, here. And it's not really, easy to kind of do the math on that. One easy thing to do here is think about like just the kind of relative positioning of things. In most cases, a lot of designers, design like around 8 pixels and things that are divisible 8 by 8 or like, or 4 in that case. And this is all, again, just making lots of rectangles. Mainly, I think that's a lot of design. Product design is often just making lots of rectangles, for better or worse, and making something that looks like that, right? We talked about Unsplash, which is a website and also a plugin that you can use. There's also this plugin called Content Reel. So again, if you're under the actions menu here, you can search Content Reel. This is a really fun plugin because what it does is it generates a lot of useful like user data. So when you're like creating an app like this, you want user data, like you want an avatar, you want like a username, you want dates and things like that. You can do that. So in this case, like maybe I want an address. So what I'll do is this description, maybe it's an address, right? So I can go an address and click on this, and that will populate this with a random address, right? But it looks like, legit data, right? So this brings like a higher level of like realism to your app, and it starts to look like a real app. And also, when it comes to your design, you're going to be designing around real data, right? So you need to make sure that your design can actually, be flexible around those data requirements here. So if there is like long addresses, maybe this address will have 2 lines versus 1 line. So this phase, we'll start doing these things like that, like the visual hierarchy of how to balance that, how to use primary colors and secondary colors to kind of like catch the user's eye, and really just clean up the design and make that consistent and polished. And at the same time, really bringing in realistic data. Your goal is to really test your design actually at the high level level with realistic data. So in this case, we use that content reel plugin. But if you have an existing app, what oftentimes you'll do is you actually take data from the production app, right? So if you're Airbnb and you're designing a new screen, you would probably go into like the production site, look at like what usernames are and grab some usernames and put them into your app, right? And just to make sure that looks real, and grab in some images from the actual website and put that in there. So when you're using real data, you can make sure that your design also matches that. Because in real life, like sometimes hotels have long names, people have long names, or sometimes hotels with different names in different languages look different in this font. And things like that you'll have to check. And the same thing with like pictures. This is a really nice, nicely shot picture, but maybe every hotel doesn't have a really great picture like that. And maybe they have like low pixel pictures. So maybe you need to scale this down so it doesn't look as bad. So at that level, those are the things we're considering and trying to kind of like, test all the different kind of possibilities while making it look good and polished, but also kind of bringing on consistency and figuring out inconsistencies here, right? And then again, this is kind of like in between. I think the hi-fi and the lo-fi wireframe stage, you'll probably be thinking a lot about accessibility, right? So when you think about accessibility, you're thinking about all the types of people who would use your app or service, right? And how you can make sure that they can use that if they have, different types of like, physical disabilities or challenges, right? So this person maybe, they only have the ability to use one hand, right? Or they are, hard of hearing. They can't hear the audio cues, or they have bad eyesight and things like that. So thinking about like all those different cases and then making sure that like it is also usable in those different cases. So again, good resource to check here is the web accessibility guidelines, and kind of go through that and understand the different affordances and things like that. Another great thing is to think about is like at the basic level, you'd be thinking about like colors as well. So for colors, the first thing would be like color contrast. Color contrast is even for people with great eyesight, it's always a big challenge to think about like if you have colors that don't have a large contrast ratio, it can be hard to read, right? There's this contrast checker, which gives you like a score. You can take the background color and you can take the foreground color, and you can see how accessible that is. So things we check is like text on solid colors, or other things would be like icons. Like if you have an icon that maybe it's like a button like that you press, making sure that has a good contrast ratio versus the background is really good. And then other things that are more complex are different types of color blindness is another thing that comes up a lot, right? So there are multiple types of color blindness, and some of it's like some people can't differentiate, red versus green, or blue versus or yellow versus gray, and things like that, right? So these are things that you need to check for. So even if maybe your contrast ratio passes, sometimes you have 2 buttons that have 2 different functions. And for people who are colorblind, they may look the same, right? So, color is a big thing that we think about, but like other things are also like, touch targets and things like that. Of making sure that these things are sized enough that anybody can hit that with with their finger and not have a hard time hitting that button in different locations and things like that. So a good place to start for that would also just be looking at like existing like OS level components, the iOS iPad UI kit. There's a bunch of basic default components in here, right, that are used across like iOS apps, and they are kind of sized appropriately to have affordance for those things like this, right? So if I was going to create like a tab bar or something like that, I would look at like the sizing maybe of like native elements and kind of maybe base my minimum sizing off that. Navigating things with the mouse and like a finger is very different, right? With a mouse, you can be very, very accurate and have very small touch targets or click targets. But yeah, those are some of the concerns and stuff like that that are important to product designers when building product design. And I guess the last thing I'll wrap up with is when you're building product design, ultimately this is not the final representation. This is of the app. What the final representation of the app is what is built and coded, right? So your goal is to make something that can be coded. So you need to kind of understand the components and how the OS works to make sure that your design is something that actually makes sense and is logical and can be created in code. The good way to kind of practice that is to look at like the human interface guidelines from Apple. Look at the similar Android guidelines from Google, and they kind of go through all those things of touch targets and how the different components works and things like that. And ideally, what you do want to do is, as much as possible, kind of lean on existing components and kind of not make your engineers going to create things from scratch all the time and stuff like that. So you'll see a lot of designs that are really nice and beautiful and they have all these custom components, but sometimes it's really good just to use like the basic components that are part of the OS, and not have things be rebuilt from scratch. Yeah, so I think that would be basically it from my side. I think we have a few minutes left here. Maybe we should kind of go into a last Q&A. If you have any questions, I'll kind of open it up and we can go through them. How does that sound?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corey. Okay, yeah, let's I think we're gonna have one of the organizers send the feedback form. So maybe while you guys are doing QA, please make sure to click that feedback form link. And if there are any questions, please feel free to use your mic and speak directly as well.
Yeah, so maybe we just go from the stickies we have here first real quick. So is the RPD the PRD? So is it set in stone, or are there times when teams have to go back and tweak and change the document? No, I think this is just like a starting point, right? Because before you actually start building or you start designing things, you don't really know how things are going to work out. But if you start working on things and exploring, maybe you find better solutions for things that should be explored, right? So what often happens is like the PRD is like the starting point. Then maybe designers will do some research exploration, and they'll come back and say like, hey, maybe we should change this and do this, right? And through that research, they'll update the PRD and they'll rewrite that, right? But the PRD will always be updated so that again, everyone's aligned, whether it's the product team or the leadership team, on what you're building and why you're building that. Some of the contents of the PRD overlap with BRD. Yes. So BRD, in this case, like business requirements document. I think that would be also the same. If this was created by, the PRD was written by a product manager, it would probably have more business elements in it. If it was, created by a designer or an engineer, it'd be more design heavy or technical and stuff like that, right? But they also would overlap. So maybe the leadership side might create BRD and then pass that to the PM, and they would include some of those aspects in the PRD that they would share then to the design and development team. Yeah. And anything else?
Let's ask some more questions, guys. We had, very cool, lesson from Corey. Also, if there are any concepts that you might have learned um, before and you might not be too, sure of, Corey's very, very experienced. He's worked across many organizations, so I think he can also help you there as well. So please don't be shy. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Well, I actually have a question, Corey.
Yeah, sure.
Um, yeah, so I think earlier I was mentioning to you about you know, the different, can you just talk a little bit about how different organizations choose to do the different PRDs? Because I thought that was interesting. We talked a bit before the module about it. At some of the larger orgs versus smaller orgs, or is it the type of products like B2B, B2C, or internal, or like what are some of the different factors that influence how the PRD is created?
I think it's more about like team structure and process. So if you have like larger teams that are more separated, so maybe in a large enterprise that's a very mature company, mature organization, then maybe the PMs don't work as closely with the designers. Well, they'll kind of like they'll communicate through the PRD and essentially of like defining everything that they need for them, and then like the PRD is like it's like a request. It's like a work request. Like, please create this thing, right? And this is your scope, and this is what you need to do. So it'll be much more formal, much more laid out. Whereas maybe if you're in a startup, you could be creating the PRD together with the product manager. It could just be a discussion between an engineer, designer, and a product manager, and you write that together. And if you're very close, how much detail you need to go into the PRD will vary too. So it's like, well, we're very close and we have a good understanding, and we're just sitting right next to each other, and we're a three-person team. Maybe we don't need to spend a week just writing the PRD. We can spend just like an hour or so write that, and then the rest we can kind of converse as we're going through it, right? So team culture will influence that, and that's also influenced again by like the scale. And then a lot of teams, again, some teams have that more kind of waterfall process where this person decides this stuff, and then once this person's decided everything, then the next team, the next role moves, which is maybe design, and then after all the design's created, maybe the engineer starts moving and things like that. Versus some teams are much more agile, and they'll be like, let's write some of the PRD, then let's do some initial kind of exploration, do some design, and then let's go back and update it. And there's a bit more of a back and forth and thing like that. So it varies a lot, but like I think you always need some sort of like definition.
I think you muted, Aaron. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying thank you for that. Ado, did you have some question, or you were turned on your camera, so I thought maybe you had a question.
No, no.
Oh, okay.
I'm good.
Do we have any designers that are, interested in design specific questions? I know some of our feedback, we found that some people are not necessarily interested in being product managers. So any other designers? I think Shobit, you unmuted. Yes.
Yeah, I had one question regarding deciding the color. How do you decide the color or the UI colors of your app? Like I have a basic understanding if it's like a fun, maybe activity sort of a app, you choose some joyful colors and stuff, but what's the proper process behind it?
Well, there's two levels of colors. There are colors that are more kind of like, say, like accent and just kind of like visual flair. There's colors that are more functional, right? On the functional side, in most cases, those are kind of like standardized, and you'll just adjust those when it comes to like, hey, this is a button, this is a delete button. It's probably going to be like red, right? And you're just going to adjust it in shades of red, right? So you'll kind of like standardize, hey, delete, say, warning, say, success, so like, yeah, basically danger warning, success, and then you'll have maybe like a primary and a secondary, uh, and those will be maybe like the five different colors that are kind of functional in that. And what we'll do is usually maybe on like the actual kind of like look and feel of that, we'll do some exploration, look at, visual inspiration of different brands and things like that to get like a certain feel. for a color scheme. So maybe this is going to be like some really, I don't know, seems like polished and kind of like, technical thing. So let's make it like a dark UI with dark colors. Maybe it's going to have some blues and purples and stuff like that. And that will be looking at just a lot of visual inspiration or maybe other, similar apps in the market to get that, the kind of accent colors there. And then based on that accent color palette, we will go in, we'll tweak like the other colors there. So like this, in this case, like if I'm going in here and I was going to like make this thing and say like, this is my main color is going to be like this deep purple or something like that. That's going to be my accent color here. And then maybe my primary color here. And then maybe my accent color from that would be, I don't know, it could just be even just like a white or a lighter version of that color. But I would like create that. And then from here, then like also you're going to have functional colors like we talked about here. So then like those three here. So that's like, you need to have a green, but you can't have any green. You need to have a green that's going to like work well with that. So maybe that green is actually kind of like this, that's a little bit bluish hue. And you kind of tweak those functional colors along with like the color palette here. So when you're kind of like creating that base palette, some of it's by feel, some and looking at different reference. And then from there, you would abstract these into different shades. There are some tools that would do that to do different steps. But what we do is usually you would have like maybe there's this base color here, and the next color is like a few steps lighter, and then the next color again is, I'm sure I have some new color here, would be a few steps lighter, and you basically create like a kind of like a shade of or a spectrum of hues for that that you would maybe use across your app and stuff like that. So it's a combination of these accent colors, which maybe this is like your theme colors that you'd use, and then these functional colors inside of here that are going to be used on like UI elements. And even with those functional colors, you still need to make sure that like they kind of like are harmonious with that color palette here. And some of that comes from like feel, but a lot of it's kind of like color theory of like this purple is a mix of red and blue, but it's got a more bluish hue. So for this green, instead of using a pure green, this green is going to be slightly on the blue side to work with that, right? Versus being slightly towards the yellow side. Here, it feels quite off, right? So a lot of this stuff goes into kind of like color theory, but it's a balance of like feel and then making that into kind of like logical and functional color palettes as well. Hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. Do we have any final questions for Corey? Who wants to be the last question?
I would like to ask a question at last.
Okay, sure, Koto. And sorry. I think two more. Sorry, Corey, if you have time. I think Annie said there might be one more on Figjam as well after.
I guess it's okay. I will finish it. Possible.
It's okay.
This is just from my curiosity. I would like to ask. So let's say, for example, if you are product designer team leader and they try to make a new website for a booking site, like booking site for retirement home. So I think the user would be elderly people, right? And like if you are in such a situation, what point do you think like designer should consider in the design? I guess because basically you are not so old, right? At least you are not like elderly person, so you have to get something like elderly minded. I'm not sure. So what point would you want to think in the design process, or additionally, like especially like during the design process, would you actually test it with elderly individually?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you are, again, you're not the target audience, and in many cases you're not, you would need to do like, research beforehand, right? Some of the stuff of like just wireframing, maybe you can do that like without too much research. When it comes to bringing it to hi-fi, you would need to think about, again, those elderly requirements, right? And then some of that would be looking at, again, new competitors in that space, if there's anything similar of apps that people are using and how those are performing. Or some of it could be creating a few hi-fi mockups and then testing those as a prototype with them in kind of A/B testing that to do research, right? Of thinking like maybe do I do like bigger touch targets? Do I do less color and more simple colors and things like that? Do I change it from serif fonts to sans serif fonts and make it clearer and things like that? So that could influence your design there. So whenever you don't have the initial context, it always goes back to like how do you get the data for that? In that case, it would just be user testing or just competitive analysis, I think.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think we have to go soon, Corey. I know you're very busy, and so I'm sorry for keeping you, but there's one question quickly called, can you talk more on how to use dev mode and best practices in FigJam? That was on the FigJam question.
Yeah, so definitely probably can't cover everything here, but like I can probably send you a video on that. Yeah, so I think that one's probably best for just like just to follow up on async, and I'll send you some best practices on that on both of those topics.
Okay, thank you so much, Corey. And okay, thanks so much. And is it okay for our cohort to add you on LinkedIn if they'd like to?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on X or whatever. Yeah, feel free to connect.
Okay, okay. Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Corey, and